The Quran states that something was living on this earth before the first human being, and it states it in a single verse, in plain language, with no ambiguity at all. Most people have never read that verse. What they have read, or more likely watched, is a story about four ancient tribes who ruled the world before Adam, who fought wars, who built civilizations, and who were destroyed by an army of angels. That story is told with tremendous confidence, usually with names attached, and it circulates in tens of millions of views across every platform. Those tribes are not in the Quran. They are not in Sahih al-Bukhari or Sahih Muslim. They are not in any authentic narration at all. But something was here. The Quran says so directly, and the answer it gives is stranger and more disciplined than the story that replaced it. Here is the verse. Chapter 15, Al-Hijr, verse 27. And the jinn we created before from scorching fire. That is it. That is the whole sentence. In Arabic, it is even more compact than the English. Wal jana kalaknahu min kablu min naris samum. And the operative words in the middle are the two everybody reads past. Min kablu, meaning before. Now, before what? This is the point where careful reading matters, because the verse does not spell out what it is prior to. It just says before. And a phrase like that only means something in relation to whatever is being discussed around it. So look at the verse immediately preceding it. Verse 26. And we created man from sounding clay, from altered mud. Verse 26 establishes the creation of man. Verse 27 says the jinn were created before man. That is the referent, and it is sitting one line up. And this is not my reading. Ibn Kathir, in his commentary on this passage, addresses that exact phrase and glosses it in 4 words. He writes that, and the jinn we created earlier, means before creating humans. That is the whole gloss. He does not hedge it, he does not present alternatives, and he moves straight on to discussing the material they were made from. Al-Jalalain does the same thing, expanding the phrase to say plainly that this means before the creation of Adam. So, this is not inference. It is not a subtle deduction assembled from scattered clues, and it does not require any special reading. It is a statement in the text, read the same way by the major commentators, that a created intelligent species existed before the first human being. And it is worth pausing on how ordinary the verse is. It is not presented as a revelation of a secret. There is no build-up to it, no emphasis, no instruction to reflect on it. It sits in a passage about the creation of Adam, and it delivers the information in half a line, as background, the way you would mention the weather. One of the more remarkable claims in Scripture, and the Quran does not raise its voice for it. And there is a supporting detail in the same passage worth noticing, because it shows the verse is not a throwaway line. The 2 verses are constructed in parallel. Verse 26 gives the creation of man and names the substance. Verse 27 gives the creation of the jinn and names the substance. Same structure, same shape, one after the other. The Quran is deliberately putting the 2 creations in the same frame so that you compare them. If verse 27 were merely incidental, it would not have been built to match the verse above it. That fact alone should reframe how you picture the opening of human history. There was no empty stage. Adam did not arrive into a world that had never held a thinking creature. Something with will, capable of obedience and disobedience, was already here. Now, what exactly was already here, and how do we know they were different in kind rather than just earlier? That brings us to the architecture, and this is where the Quran gets genuinely precise. Chapter 55, Ar-Rahman, verses 14 and 15, place the 2 creations side by side in consecutive lines. He created man from clay like pottery, and he created the jinn from a smokeless flame of fire. 2 verses, back to back, 2 creations, 2 substances. The chapter is deliberately setting them next to each other, so the contrast is unavoidable. And then, a narration in Sahih Muslim completes the set with a 3rd. The angels were created from light. The jinn were created from a smokeless flame of fire. And Adam was created from what has been described to you. 3 creations, 3 materials, and they are light, fire, and clay. Now hold those 3 materials in your head and notice what they actually are, because the choice is not arbitrary. Light has no substance you can hold. It does not resist you, It does not have a location you can point to in the way a stone does, and it does not change. That is the angels. Fire is the middle term. It is real, it moves, it consumes. It is difficult to contain, and it does not hold a shape. It is the least stable material of the three, that is the jinn. And clay is the heaviest. It is inert, it stays where you put it, and it is the only one of the three that is straightforwardly of the earth. You can dig it out of the ground with your hands. That is us. The Quran is also unusually specific about the clay. It does not simply say earth. Chapter 15 calls it sounding clay from altered mud, and chapter 55 compares it to pottery, meaning clay that has been fired and hardened into a shape. Ibn Abbas, Mujahid, and Qatada are all recorded discussing what the term means. Ibn Kathir notes that the point of the description is to indicate the noble origin of Adam rather than to demean it, which is worth saying because a substance you scrape off a riverbank does not sound like a compliment. The material of the jinn gets the same specificity. Ibn Abbas described the smokeless flame as the kind that kills. There is also a report from Abdullah ibn Masud, may Allah be pleased with him, that this particular flame is 1 part out of 70 of the fire the jinn were created from. Neither substance is described casually. 3 substances, arranged from the least material to the most, and the creation sequence in the sources runs the same direction. Angels, then jinn, then man. The Quran is not giving you a story here. It is giving you an order. And notice what that order does to a very common assumption. A lot of people carry a vague sense that human beings are the pinnacle, the final and best thing made, arriving at the top of an ascending scale. The material sequence runs the other way. We are the densest, the slowest, the most tied to the ground, and we arrived last. There is one more implication of that ordering worth drawing out. The jinn are the middle term in every sense. They sit between light and clay in substance. They arrive between the angels and us in sequence, and they share properties with both. Like the angels, they are ordinarily invisible to us. Like us, they can obey or refuse. That middle position is the reason they occupy so much space in Islamic thought, and so much space in the imagination generally. They are the only created beings we are told about, who are near enough to be relevant and hidden enough to be unfalsifiable, which is precisely why stories attach to them so easily, and why the discipline in this subject matters more than in most, which also makes what happens next in the story genuinely strange, and we are coming to that. Because, at the moment of Adam's creation, the entire order gets inverted. The beings of light are commanded to prostrate to the being of clay. And the one who refuses is the one made of fire, and his stated reason for refusing is exactly the hierarchy we just walked through. He argues that he is better because he was made from fire, and Adam from clay. He was reading the materials the same way you probably did 30 seconds ago. And the Quran records that reasoning specifically in order to show it failing. But first, the honest limit. The Quran tells you that the jinn were created before man. It tells you what they were made from. It tells you they possess will, because the entire episode with Iblis depends on a creature being commanded and refusing. And Al-Kahf verse 50 tells us plainly that Iblis was of the jinn, and then it stops. It does not tell you how long they were here. It does not tell you how many of them there were. It does not tell you where they lived, whether they built anything, whether they had languages or nations or history. It does not describe a single event from that period. Not one. In a book that describes the Ark of Nuh, the staff of Musa, the prison of Yusuf, and the exact dimensions of a wall built between 2 mountains, there is no incident, no name, no place, and no date from the entire era before Adam. That is a conspicuous silence in a text that is not generally shy about detail. The Quran says what came before. It does not say what they did. That silence is the space the 4 tribes rushed into, and we will get there. But before we do, there is one verse in the Quran that appears to lift the corner of that silence, and it has been the subject of scholarly disagreement for over 1,000 years. Chapter 2, Al-Baqarah, verse 30. And when your Lord said to the angels, "Indeed, I will make upon the earth a successive authority," they said, "Will you place upon it one who causes corruption therein and sheds blood, while we declare your praise and sanctify you?" He said, "Indeed, I know that which you do not know." Read the angel's line again, and let it be as strange as it actually is. God announces that he is going to place a Khalifa on the earth. That is the announcement. There is nothing in it about corruption, nothing about bloodshed, nothing about behavior of any kind. And the angels respond by asking about corruption and bloodshed. Where did that come from? That is not a rhetorical question. It is the actual interpretive problem in the verse, and it has occupied commentators for over 1,000 years. Nothing in the sentence they just heard mentioned it. They have been told that a being is going to be placed on the earth, and their immediate response is a specific and rather grim prediction about what that being will do. Not a general worry. Two named behaviors. There is a second oddity in the same verse that usually goes unremarked. The angels do not only predict the behavior, they then contrast it with themselves. While we declare your praise and sanctify you. So the response has two parts, a prediction about the new creation and a statement about their own conduct. Whatever prompted the first part, the second part indicates they understood the announcement as being about who occupies the earth and what that occupant is for. That is a genuine puzzle in the text, and the commentators treated it as one. Ibn Kathir, in his commentary on this verse, gives several explanations, and I am going to give them to you the way he gives them, because the way this material is usually presented online collapses four positions into one. The first explanation is that the angels reasoned it out from the material. They had been told the new creation would be made from clay, and from the nature of that substance, from what a being of earth is like, they drew a conclusion about how it would behave. Ibn Kathir writes that the angels knew this according to their understanding of human nature, since God had stated he would create man from clay. Under this reading, the angels are not reporting history, they are inferring from physics. And that is less strange than it sounds. A being of pure light, being told that the next creation will be assembled out of wet ground, is being told something about limitation. Clay is bounded, it competes for space, it decays, and it can be damaged. Beings made from a scarce and perishable material will end up in conflict over that material. You do not need to have witnessed anything to see where that goes. The second explanation is linguistic, and it comes from Al-Qurtubi. The word used is khalifa, and that word carries within it the sense of one who judges between people, who settles disputes and prevents injustice. Now follow that. If a being is being appointed to judge disputes, then disputes are going to exist. If it is appointed to prevent injustice, then injustice must be possible. The job description implies the problem. So, under Al-Qurtubi's reading, the angels heard a single word and correctly deduced from it that the creature being appointed would be one that quarrels, and they asked about it. That is not history either, that is grammar. And it is worth noting that Al-Qurtubi and other scholars took this word so seriously that they derived a legal obligation from it, arguing that this verse establishes the necessity of appointing an authority to judge between people, aid the oppressed, and prevent injustice. That is how much weight the single word Khalifa was understood to carry. The third explanation comes from Qatada, and it is the simplest. He held that God had informed them. They knew because they had been given knowledge of it, and their question was a request to understand the wisdom rather than an objection to the decision. Under that reading, the shape of their question is roughly this. We understand there will be corruption. If the purpose of this creation is worship, we are already doing that continuously. So what is the thing you are achieving that we are not providing? Which, notice, is a question that receives an answer in the very same verse. He said, "Indeed, I know that which you do not know." And the verses immediately following give the demonstration, when Adam is taught the names, and the angels are shown that they do not have them. And Ibn Kathir is careful on this point, because it matters and because it is easy to get wrong. He states directly that what the angels said was not a form of disputing with God, and not out of envy toward the children of Adam, as some mistakenly thought. The Quran elsewhere describes the angels as those who do not speak before he speaks. This is a question asked with permission, seeking to understand. Now the fourth reading, and this is the one that has swallowed the other three on the internet. The fourth reading is that the angels knew because they had seen it before, that the jinn had inhabited the earth prior to Adam, that they had corrupted it and shed blood on it, and that the angels were drawing on direct experience of an earlier occupancy. You will find this in Al-Jalalain, which states it as part of its gloss on the verse, adding that when the earlier inhabitants became corrupt, angels were sent against them and they were driven off. You will find related reports collected by al-Tabari. Maki, in his commentary, notes that many commentators narrated this view. It is a real position held by real scholars, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. It is also, notably, the most narratively satisfying of the four, which is worth being suspicious of in yourself. It supplies a scene. The other three supply reasoning. But look carefully at where it sits. Ibn Kathir does not lead with it. He gives the reasoning from Clay explanation first, then al-Qurtubi's linguistic reading, then Qatada's. The reading that has become the entire subject on YouTube is not the one the most widely used Sunni commentary puts at the front. And that ordering is information. When a commentator of that stature presents several possibilities and does not settle on one, the honest conclusion is that the verse does not settle it either. Ibn Kathir also records a fifth explanation entirely, from al-Razi and others, which reads the angel's words as a request that they themselves be allowed to inhabit the earth rather than the children of Adam, with the divine reply, meaning that he knows whether their remaining in the heavens is better for them. He records it, and, as with the others, does not close the file. 5 readings of one question. That is what the commentary tradition actually looks like when you open it, rather than the single confident answer that gets extracted from it. So here is where we actually are, and I want to be exact. The Quran states that the jinn were created before man. That is firm. The Quran does not state that the jinn corrupted the earth before Adam. That is an interpretation of why the angels asked a question. It is one of several interpretations, and the commentators who examined it did not agree on it. And notice how thin the foundation is once you see it clearly. The entire pre-Adamic war narrative, all of it, rests on a reading of the motive behind a question, not on a description of events, not on a verse recounting anything that happened, on why a group of angels phrased an inquiry the way they did. That is a very small hook to hang a civilization on. You can hold that fourth reading. Plenty of learned people have. What you cannot do is present it as the thing the Quran says, because the Quran does not say it. Quick word before we continue. If this is landing for you, take a second to subscribe and hit that like button. It genuinely moves this channel forward more than you would think. And I want your answer in the comments on this one, because it is the actual question underneath this video. When scripture leaves a gap, is filling it in a sign of love for the subject or a failure of discipline? People do it because they care. That is what makes it hard. Tell me where you land. I read them all. Then stay with me. Because now we deal with the 4 tribes, where those names came from, and the verse that classical scholars use to shut this entire conversation down. Back to the tribes. The names are Hin, Bin, Tum, and Nasnas. I am saying them once, plainly, because you have almost certainly heard them, and pretending otherwise would be strange. In the popular version, they are 4 races who occupied the earth before Adam, with distinct characteristics, territories, and in the more elaborate tellings, a war that ends with their destruction. The tellings do not agree with each other, incidentally, which is the first thing you would notice if you watched 5 of these videos in a row. The order of the tribes shifts. Their attributes shift. What they are supposed to have done shifts. Authentic material does not behave that way, because it is anchored to a fixed wording that everyone is transmitting from. Here is where they come from. They are not in the Quran. No verse names them, alludes to them, or contains anything that could be read as a reference to them. If you take a concordance to the Quran and look for these words, you will not find them, because they are not there. They are not in Sahih al-Bukhari. They are not in Sahih Muslim. They are not in the Sunan collections as authentic prophetic narrations. There is no chain running back to the Prophet, peace be upon him, for any of it, which means there is nothing to grade. This is not a case of a weak hadith. It is a case of no hadith. What they are is material that appears in early commentary literature, traceable to figures including al-Sudi and later al-Thalabi, and to reports transmitted in al-Tabari's enormous collection, some of them attributed to Ibn Abbas. May Allah be pleased with him. Take the last of those 4 names as an illustration, because it is the one that gives the game away. Nasnas is not an invented word. It appears in classical Arabic lexicography and in Arabic folklore as a term for a strange creature of the wilderness, part of the general stock of stories that circulated in the region long before and long after the revelation. It is a folkloric word that got recruited into a scriptural narrative. That is characteristic of how this material assembles. Existing regional stories, existing names, gathered up and attached to a gap in the text where nobody could check them. And that requires a word about what Al-Tabari's commentary is, because the same misunderstanding that surrounds Al-Isabah surrounds this. Al-Tabari's method was to collect. He gathered the reports available to him on each verse, with their chains, and set them down. That comprehensiveness is exactly why the work is invaluable, and it is also why finding something in it does not mean it is established. A collection of everything said includes things that are weak, and Al-Tabari was not always issuing a verdict. So, material sitting in a commentary is not the same as material sitting in a Sahih. The two books are doing different jobs. One is a filtered archive with an admission standard. The other is a comprehensive record of what was said, preserved so that later scholars could do the filtering themselves. Citing the second as though it were the first is the most common single error in this entire field. Now, the category this belongs to has a name in Islamic scholarship, and the name is the whole story. It is called Isra'iliyat. The term refers to material that entered Islamic commentary literature from earlier Jewish, Christian, and in some cases Persian sources. It arrived in the first centuries through converts and through ordinary cultural contact, and it clustered exactly where you would predict, which is around the parts of Scripture where the Quran is brief. The Quran is brief about the period before Adam, so that is exactly where the gap filled up. And notice that this is not a slur on any earlier community. The category is descriptive rather than accusatory. It simply marks material as having entered from outside the Islamic sources, which means it cannot be used to establish anything within them, whatever its own origin or merit. Scholars distinguished within it too. Some Isra'iliyat agrees with what is established, some contradicts it outright, and a large middle band neither confirms nor conflicts, and the classical instruction on that middle band was to neither affirm nor deny it. The four tribes sit in that middle band, which means the correct scholarly posture toward them is not belief and not denunciation. It is to decline to build on them. And this is where something genuinely satisfying happens, because the scholar who did the most to systematize the rejection of this category is the same man we have been quoting all the way through this video. Ibn Kathir is the great critic of Isra'iliyat. His entire methodological program was to explain the Quran through the Quran, then through authentic narration, then through the statements of the companions, and to flag imported material as what it was. The commentary that gives us the careful four-part treatment of the angel's question is the same commentary written by the man who spent his career pulling this kind of material out of circulation. So when someone cites classical tafsir to support the four tribes, notice which classical tafsir, and notice that the most widely used Sunni commentary in the world was written specifically to counter that kind of transmission. None of this means the early scholars who repeated these reports were dishonest. They were transmitting what reached them, often explicitly noting the chain so a later reader could evaluate it. The system worked exactly as designed. The material was preserved with its provenance attached, and later scholars used that provenance to sort it. What is happening now is different. The provenance has been stripped off, and the story is being presented as scripture, and there is a cost to that beyond accuracy. A person who builds part of their picture of Islam on this material, and who later discovers it was never established, does not usually make a small correction. They start wondering what else they were told that has no basis. The damage is not in the story. It is in what happens when the story fails. Which is a good reason to be told the sourcing up front by someone who is not selling you anything. And there is a verse the classical scholars reached for whenever this kind of speculation started, which is the right place to end this. Chapter 18, Al-Kahf, verse 51. I did not make them witness to the creation of the heavens and the earth, nor to the creation of themselves. Read the context of that verse, and it is even sharper. It comes immediately after the passage about Iblis being of the jinn, and it is a statement about why these beings and their offspring should not be taken as allies or authorities. They were not there. They did not observe the making of the world, and they did not observe the making of themselves. Nobody was standing there taking notes. Not the jinn, not us. The verse is doing something specific. It is closing off a source. It is saying that on the subject of what happened at the beginning, There are no independent witnesses to consult, and any claim to hidden information about that period is a claim without a foundation, which means the entire genre of pre-Adamic history has been addressed in the Quran, and the address is not a description, it is a refusal to supply one. And it is a refusal with a reason attached, which is the part that makes it more than a brush-off. The reason given is testimony. Nobody was present. That is an evidentiary standard, applied by the Quran to itself, in a verse about not taking unreliable authorities as guides. The book is modeling the same discipline it is asking of you. Now, is that disappointing? I want to take that seriously rather than dismiss it, because the appetite behind these stories is not a bad appetite. Wanting to know what came before is one of the most human things there is. It is the same impulse that produced archaeology and cosmology and every origin story any culture has ever told. But look at what the Quran actually gives you in place of the narrative, because it is not nothing. It gives you a sequence: angels, then jinn, then man. It gives you 3 materials, arranged from the most subtle to the most dense. It gives you the fact that the earth held intelligent life before it held us. It gives you a hierarchy, and then it inverts the hierarchy at the moment of Adam's creation, and it records the objection of the one who could not accept the inversion. That is an enormous amount of structure. It just is not a story. And it answers questions people genuinely have. Why do the jinn behave the way the sources describe? Because of what they are made of and where they sit in the order. Why was Iblis's refusal about materials? Because the materials are a real hierarchy and he was reading it correctly and drawing the wrong conclusion. Why does the Quran bother mentioning the substance of each creation at all? Because the substances are the argument. None of that requires a single pre-Adamic date. And the difference between structure and story is the difference between something you can build on and something you can only repeat. Notice also what the missing information would actually give you. Suppose you knew how long the jinn were here. Suppose you had their names, their cities, the dates of their wars. What would change? Not one obligation, not one prayer, not one decision you have to make this week. The Quran is remarkably consistent about this. It supplies what bears on how a person lives, and it declines to supply what merely satisfies. The stories it does tell in detail, Yusuf and his brothers, Musa and Pharaoh, the man at the edge of the city, all have an argument inside them. A catalog of pre-Adamic tribes does not. So the honest answer to the question this video asks is short. Who lived on earth before Adam? The jinn. The Quran says so at chapter 15, verse 27, in one line, and the major commentators read it exactly that way. What did they do here? The Quran does not say anywhere in any verse. The angel's question in chapter 2 might reflect knowledge of it, and it might reflect reasoning from clay, or from the word Khalifa, or from information they were given. Serious scholars have held all of those positions, and the text does not close between them. And who were Hin, Bin, Tum, and Nasnas? They are not a Quranic answer to any question. They are Israeliyat. They belong to a category of imported material that the tradition identified, labeled, and taught its students to recognize several centuries before any of us were born. The tools for sorting this were built 1,000 years ago. They still work, and they are freely available in translation. Almost nobody uses them. That is the part I would actually want you to take from this. Not the conclusion about 4 names, which you will forget. The method. When you next meet a confident claim about Islamic history, the questions are always the same 3. Is it in the Quran? Is it in an authentic narration? And if it is in neither, where did it come from and who first said it? Those 3 questions dissolve most of what circulates, and they take about 10 minutes to run. And the last thing worth saying is the thing this channel keeps arriving at, because the Quran keeps arriving at it. The book that refuses to tell you the population of the earth before Adam, that declines to name a single pre-Adamic event, that explicitly states no one was made a witness to the creation, is not a book that is withholding. It is a book that is selective, and you can see what it selects for by looking at what it says instead. Chapter 39, verse 53. Say, O my servants who have transgressed against themselves, do not despair of the mercy of God. Indeed, God forgives all sins. Indeed, He is the forgiving, the merciful. There is no ambiguity in that one. No competing readings, no chain to grade, no category to sort it into. The things that were left out were left out. The thing that was needed was made as plain as language allows. Something was here before us. We are told that much, and we are told what it was made of, and then we are told to get on with our lives. There is a kind of respect in that, if you look at it the right way. A book that filled every gap would be treating you as someone who needs to be entertained into belief. This one hands you a sequence, a set of materials, an order and its inversion, and trusts you to find that sufficient. The 4 tribes are what happens when someone decides it was not. If you want to go further into what the sources actually establish about these beings, rather than what got attached to them later, the video on the jinn who claim to have met every prophet is on this channel, and it is the natural next one to watch.